The surgical steel tray rattled as Ji-soo's hands shook, the rhythmic drip of blood hitting the linoleum floor sounding like a ticking bomb. A serrated combat knife was pressed against her jugular, the cold edge biting into her skin just enough to draw a thin line of red. The man slumped in the trauma chair didn't look like a patient. He looked like a fallen god of the underworld, his charcoal suit shredded and soaked deep crimson. His eyes, dark and glassed over with shock, never left hers. Behind him, 3 men in identical black silk ties stood with hands inside their blazers, their silhouettes cutting sharp, lethal shapes against the flickering hospital fluorescence. One word echoed in the cramped ear: "Bay," hissed through gritted teeth as Ji-soo felt the blade press harder. So, 10 minutes ago, Ji-soo was counting down the seconds until her double shift ended, her only concern the lukewarm coffee waiting in the break room. She didn't see the black sedans scream into the ambulance bay with their lights off. She didn't know that the man bleeding out under her hands was Kang Dae-hyun, the Dragon of Seoul, a man whose name was whispered in fear from the back alleys of Gangnam to the high-rise boardrooms of the blue-chip giants. By picking up that needle, Ji-soo wasn't just performing surgery, she was signing a contract written in blood. If his heart stopped beating, she wouldn't leave this room alive. If she saved him, she would become the most wanted woman in South Korea. This is the moment the hospital walls dissolved, and the scent of antiseptic was replaced by the smell of wet pavement and gunpowder. Ji-soo reached for the local anesthetic, her fingers brushing the man's icy skin. He flinched, his hand, tattooed with a swirling black dragon tail that disappeared up his sleeve, clamping around her wrist. His grip was a vice. "No numbing," he rasped, the words thick with the metallic tang of internal bleeding. "I need to stay awake." Ji-soo didn't argue. She grabbed the curved needle and the black nylon thread. She didn't look at the men with the guns. She focused on the jagged hole in his side, a puncture wound from a rebar spike that had narrowly missed his kidney. She pushed the needle through the skin. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened until the bone looked ready to snap, but he didn't make a sound. His pulse under her thumb was a frantic, dying bird. "Faster," one of the men in the suits barked, his hand twitching toward his holster. Ji-soo ignored him, her movements becoming a blur of practiced precision. She knotted the first stitch. Outside the trauma curtain, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. Not the steady pulse of an ambulance, the aggressive, multi-tone scream of the Seoul Metropolitan Police. Dae-hyun's eyes snapped open wide. He grabbed the front of Ji-soo's scrub top, pulling her face inches from his. The scent of expensive cologne and iron filled her lungs. "They aren't here for me," he whispered, a drop of sweat tracing the scar on his cheek. "They're here to finish what the rivals started. If you want to live, you leave with us." The hospital's double doors at the end of the hall burst open with a crash of glass. Heavy boots hammered against the floor. Ji-soo snipped the last thread. She looked at the exit, then at the man whose life was literally in her hands. Dae-hyun stood up, swaying, his hand clenching his stitched side. One of his men threw a heavy trench coat over his shoulders to hide the blood. "Decision time, nurse," Dae-hyun said, his voice regaining its lethal edge. The first gunshot shattered the glass of the nurse's station 20 feet away. Ji-soo didn't think. She grabbed her medical bag and dove toward the back service elevator with the men in black. The elevator dropped with a stomach-turning lurch. The air inside was thick with the heavy breathing of 5 people and the copper scent of Dae-hyun's wound. He leaned against the back wall, his face the color of ash, but his eyes remained fixed on Ji-soo. He reached out, his bloody thumb tracing the hospital ID badge pinned to her chest. "Ji-soo," he read, the name sounding like a threat and a prayer. "You just walked out of your life. There is no going back to the year after this." The doors slid open to the underground parking garage. A matte black SUV sat idling, its exhaust pluming in the cold night air. The driver didn't wait for them to buckle in. The tires screamed as they tore out of the garage, missing a police cruiser by inches. "Where are we going?" Ji-soo asked, her voice finally cracking as she clutched her bag. "To a place where the law doesn't reach," Dae-hyun replied. He slumped over, his head hitting the window. The stitches Ji-soo had just labored over began to seep red against the charcoal fabric of his suit. Ji-soo pressed her hand against his side, trying to stem the flow. She looked out the back window. 3 sets of headlights were gaining on them, weaving through the late-night traffic of the Mapo Bridge. Muzzle flashes lit up the night. The SUV's rear window exploded into 1,000 diamonds. If you believe Ji-soo deserves to survive the chaos she was dragged into, hit the like button so her story reaches those who know that one choice can change everything. The SUV swerved violently, fishtailing across the rain-slicked metal of the bridge. Ji-soo's head slammed against the leather headrest. Outside, the Han River was a black abyss waiting below the railing. The tires, the driver yelled. Another burst of gunfire erupted from the pursuing cars. The SUV drifted, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a blown tire vibrating through the frame. They weren't going to make it across the bridge. Dae-hyun stirred, his hand fumbling for the door handle. Out, he croaked. Into the water. It's the only way they don't find the bodies. You'll bleed out in minutes in that temperature. Ji-soo shouted, but the men in suits were already kicking the doors open. The SUV slammed into a stalled delivery truck, coming to a dead stop. Ji-soo was hauled out of the car by her collar. The cold wind ripped through her thin scrubs. Behind them, the rival gang's cars screeched to a halt. Men stepped out, carrying short-barreled submachine guns. Dae-hyun stood at the edge of the bridge railing, the wind whipping his coat like a dark cape. He looked at Ji-soo, a strange, fleeting shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "Can you swim, nurse?" Before she could answer, he wrapped a heavy arm around her waist and stepped back into the nothingness. The impact with the Han River was like hitting a brick wall. The cold was a physical blow, vacuuming the air straight out of Ji-soo's lungs. Everything went black, then a chaotic, bubbling gray. She clawed at the water, her scrubs heavy and dragging her down. A hand grabbed her hair, pulling her upward until her face broke the surface. Dae-hyun was gasping, his face contorted in agony as the river water hit his open wound. He dragged her toward a concrete pylon beneath the bridge. High above, the sound of gunfire continued, but they were hidden in the shadows of the massive structure. "Keep moving," Dae-hyun wheezed. They waded through the waist-deep sludge of the riverbank, miles from where they jumped, until they reached a nondescript drainage pipe. Waiting there was a rusted delivery van. A man with a jagged scar across his nose stepped out, bowing low to Dae-hyun. "The dragon has returned," the man whispered. They drove in silence to a safe house disguised as a traditional Hanok house in the hills of Bukshan. Inside, the floors were heated, and the air smelled of cedar and expensive incense. Ji-soo was pushed into a room with a low table and a basin of hot water. "Fix him," the scarred man commanded, dropping a new medical kit on the floor. "Properly this time." Ji-soo worked for 3 hours. She cleaned the river silt from the wound, restitched the internal tearing, and started in 4 lines she found in the kit. Dae-hyun drifted in and out of consciousness. In the quiet moments, Ji-soo looked at his hands. They weren't just tattooed, they were covered in small, faded scars, knuckle duster marks, blade nicks, cigarette burns. As the sun began to bleed over the Seoul skyline, Dae-hyun's fever finally broke. He opened his eyes, watching Ji-soo as she sat slumped against the wall, her hands stained with dried blood and river mud. "Why didn't you run when we hit the water?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice hollow. "We don't leave people behind. Even the ones we should." Dae-hyun reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy gold coin embossed with a dragon. He flipped it toward her. It landed with a dull thud on the tatami mat. "That coin buys you anything in this city. Safety. Wealth. Silence." "I don't want your money," Ji-soo said, standing up. Her legs felt like lead. "I want to go home." Dae-hyun looked at the door, then back at her. "Your apartment was raided 20 minutes ago. The police found your prints on a discarded shell casing at the hospital. You're a fugitive, Ji-soo. You have no home. You only have me." Ji-soo felt the room tilt. The walls of the beautiful Hanok house suddenly felt like a gilded cage. She looked at the gold coin, then at the man who had effectively erased her existence. If you think Ji-soo should take the coin and run, or stay and fight for her life, drop a like so the story knows which path she should take. The following days were a blurred montage of shadows and silk. Ji-soo was moved from the safe house to a high-rise penthouse that overlooked the entire city. She was given clothes that cost more than her annual salary, silk blouses, tailored slacks, and a long wool coat that felt like a shroud. She wasn't a prisoner, but 2 men in suits always stood outside her door. Dae-hyun recovered with a speed that defied medical logic. A week later he entered her room. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, his hair slicked back, looking every bit the corporate titan. Only the slight stiffness in his gait betrayed the hole in his side. "Tonight we settle the debt," he said. He led her to a private elevator that descended into a sub-basement. When the doors opened, Ji-soo flinched. It was a high-tech war room. Dozens of screens showed live feeds of the city, docks, warehouses, police stations. "The men who attacked us on the bridge were the Kanjin Syndicate," Dae-hyun explained, pointing to a screen showing a shipping terminal. "They think I'm dead. They're moving a shipment of narcotics tonight that will fund their expansion for a decade. I'm going to take it. And I need you. I'm a nurse, not a soldier, Ji-soo snapped. I don't need a soldier. I need someone who can recognize the scent of the chemical stabilizer they use. It's a medical-grade precursor. My men don't have your nose. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming the small space. Help me finish this and I will give you a new identity. A clean slate. Anywhere in the world. The shipping terminal was a maze of rusted steel and salt-heavy air. Ji-soo wore a tactical headset, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She followed Dae-hyun through the shadows, his movements silent and predatory. Left, he signaled. They entered a refrigerated container. Inside were hundreds of crates marked as medical supplies. Ji-soo opened one. The scent hit her immediately, sweet, sickly, and familiar. This is it, she whispered. Fentanyl precursors. Suddenly the floodlights snapped on. The container was surrounded. A man with a shock of white hair and a jagged scar across his throat stepped into the light. Dae-hyun, the man laughed. I knew you were too arrogant to stay dead. And you brought a trophy. The Kanjin leader leveled a shotgun at Ji-soo's head. Drop the ledger or the girl dies. Dae-hyun didn't move. He didn't reach for his gun. He looked at Ji-soo, then at the rival. She's just a nurse, Dae-hyun said, his voice devoid of emotion. Kill her. It won't change the fact that your men at the docks are already dead. The Kanjin leader's eyes widened. He pulled the trigger. Ji-soo dived for the floor as the crates behind her exploded in a hail of wood and white powder. Dae-hyun moved like lightning. 2 muffled shots rang out. The Kanjin leader fell, a neat hole appearing in his forehead. The terminal erupted into a symphony of violence. Ji-soo crawled through the white powder, the air thick with the deadly chemical. She saw a man aiming at Dae-hyun's back. She grabbed a heavy steel wrench from a nearby rack and swung it with both hands. It connected with the man's temple with a sickening crunch. Dae-hyun turned, his eyes wide with surprise. He finished the last of the rivals and grabbed Ji-soo, hauling her out into the fresh air. You're full of surprises, nurse, he panted, checking her for injuries. You were going to let him kill me, she gasped, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the wrench. I knew he'd hesitate. I needed the opening. He grabbed her face, his thumb brushing a smudge of white powder from her cheek. I would never let you die, Ji-soo. The sirens were closing in. Dae-hyun's men were already vanishing into the night. He handed her a black envelope. Your flight leaves in 3 hours. New Zealand. You'll be a citizen. A nurse. You'll never see a dragon again. Ji-soo looked at the envelope, then at the man standing in the moonlight, covered in the blood of his enemies. She thought of the ER, the long shifts, the lukewarm coffee. Then she thought of the cold Han River and the weight of the gold coin in her pocket. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. Ji-soo stood at the gates of Incheon Airport, the black envelope heavy in her hand. The sun was rising, a pale pink line against the gray horizon. She looked at the departure board. New Zealand. A new life. A quiet life. She felt a presence behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know the scent of cedar and expensive tobacco. The car is waiting if you change your mind, Dae-hyun said. Ji-soo looked at the ticket inside the envelope. Then she looked at the reflection in the glass. She didn't see the tired nurse anymore. She saw a woman who had jumped off a bridge and survived. She tore the ticket in half. I'm not going to New Zealand, she said, turning to face him. Dae-hyun's eyes narrowed. Then you're staying in a world where every day is a war. I know how to stitch wounds, Ji-soo said, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. And in your world there are going to be a lot of them. Dae-hyun reached out, his hand hovering over hers. He didn't take it. He just nodded. The dragon needs a heart, Ji-soo. But remember, once you're in, the only way out is a pine box. I've seen enough pine boxes to know how to avoid them, she replied. They walked out of the airport together, heading toward the matte black SUV. As the doors closed, the city of Seoul woke up, unaware that its underworld had just gained its most dangerous and compassionate asset. 5 years later, the Dragon's Clinic was a legend in the dark corners of Asia. It was a place where the wounded could go and never be asked questions, guarded by men with dragon tattoos and run by a woman whose hands never shook. Ji-soo stood on the balcony of the clinic, watching the Han River flow peacefully below. She felt a hand on her waist. She leaned back into the warmth of the man who had changed her world. Are you happy, Ji-soo? Dae-hyun asked. She looked at the small, surgical scar on her own thumb, a reminder of the night on the bridge. I'm alive, she said. And for the first time, I know exactly who I am. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything for the truth, and found a destiny they never expected. The screen fades to black as the distant sound of a heart monitor begins to beep, steady and strong, echoing into the silence. If you believe that Ji-soo chose the right path, or if you think the quiet life was the better play, hit the like button so her journey reaches those who are still standing on their own bridges, waiting to jump. Every choice has a price. Every wound has a story. And every dragon needs someone to keep it from bleeding out. The city of Seoul glitters in the final shot, a million lights representing a million secrets, but only one nurse knows them all. "I'll see you in surgery," she whispers. The monitor flatlines for a split second before jumping back to life, the final beat of a story that will never truly end. The penthouse was a cage made of floor-to-ceiling glass and polished marble. My hands, once accustomed to the smell of latex and iodine, now smelled of sandalwood and expensive ink. Daehyun stood by the window, his silhouette a jagged shadow against the neon sprawl of Gangnam. He didn't turn when I entered. He was tracing the line of a fresh scar on his palm, a reminder of the night we jumped. "You're staring at the river again," I said, my voice barely a ripple in the silence. "The Han River doesn't forgive, Ji-soo," he replied, his reflection in the glass looking older than he was. "It just hides things until they rot and float to the surface. Like the Kanjin Syndicate. They aren't dead. They're just regrouping in the dark." He turned, and for a second the cold dragon mask slipped. He looked at the medical bag I still carried, the only piece of my old life I refused to burn. He reached out, his fingers brushing the strap on my shoulder. "I need you to do more than stitch skin today," he whispered. "I need you to look at a ledger. A list of medical suppliers who are funneling our precursors to the rivals. I need a nurse's eye to see the discrepancies in the dosages." I realized then that my value wasn't just in my steady hands, it was in my knowledge of the systems that kept people alive, and the ones that could quietly kill them. I sat at the mahogany desk, the digital files glowing blue against my skin. As I scrolled through the names, a cold knot formed in my stomach. "Daehyun," I said, my breath hitching. "This isn't just a supply leak. These are the same doctors I worked with at the hospital. They aren't being bribed. They're being blackmailed with patient data." The realization hit the room like a physical weight. The war wasn't just in the alleys anymore, it was in the wards where I used to save lives. Before Daehyun could respond, the security monitors on the wall flickered to static. A single red dot began to pulse on the map of the building. "They're inside," Daehyun hissed, reaching for the suppressed pistol on the desk. He didn't push me into a panic room. He handed me a tactical vest and a burner phone. "Stay behind me. If we get separated, go to the roof. Don't look back." The lights died. The penthouse plunged into a terrifying velvet blackness. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled thump of boots on the stairs. We moved through the dark like twin ghosts. Daehyun led the way, his movements fluid and silent, a predator in his natural habitat. I held my medical bag tight against my chest, the metal instruments inside clinking softly with every step. We reached the secondary stairwell when the first flashbang detonated. The world turned into a screaming white void. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the sound of my own heartbeat. I felt Daehyun's hand grab my collar, hauling me through a doorway as bullets shredded the drywall where my head had been seconds before. "Down," he roared. He returned fire, the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of his weapon a steady counterpoint to the chaos. I crawled toward the corner, my eyes slowly adjusting to the strobing light. Through the smoke I saw them. Men in tactical gear, but they weren't wearing syndicate colors. They were wearing police tactical vests. "Daehyun, they're cops." I screamed. "They're reassigned cops, Ji-soo," he spat, reloading his magazine with mechanical speed. "Kenjin bought the precinct. There is no law tonight." We were cornered in the server room. The air was hot and smelled of ozone and melting plastic. Daehyun looked at the servers, the heart of his empire, then at me. He knew we couldn't hold them off for long. He grabbed a heavy fire axe from the wall and began to smash the cooling pipes. High-pressure steam erupted, filling the room with a thick, white shroud. "Now," he signaled. We moved through the steam, invisible to the infrared goggles of the attackers. We reached the service elevator, but just as the doors began to close, a hand clamped onto the edge. A man with a jagged scar and cold, familiar eyes forced his way in. It was the same man who had held the knife to my throat in the ER. The struggle in the confined space was visceral. No guns, just bone-on-bone impact. Daehyun's stitches, my handiwork, tore open as he lunged. I saw the blood soak through his shirt, the crimson bloom spreading like a warning. The attacker pinned Daehyun against the railing, his thumbs pressing into Daehyun's windpipe. I didn't think. I reached into my bag and pulled out a long-bore biopsy needle. I plunged it into the attacker's brachial artery with the precision of a surgeon. He let out a strangled cry, his grip loosening as the blood sprayed against the chrome walls. Daehyun slumped to the floor, gasping for air. He looked at the man bleeding out at his feet, then up at me. I was standing there, the needle still in my hand, my scrubs splattered with a life I had just taken to save his. "You're one of us now, Ji-soo," he whispered, his voice a mix of pride and tragedy. If you believe Ji-soo had no choice but to cross the line to save the man she cared for, drop a like so her story reaches those who understand that survival has a heavy price. The safe house was a cabin tucked deep in the pine forests of Gangwon-do. The air was sharp and smelled of snow. Inside, the fire crackled, but the warmth couldn't reach the coldness settling in my marrow. I was cleaning Daehyun's wound again, my fingers moving with a detached, clinical efficiency. "You're quiet," he said, watching me. "I killed a man with a medical tool, Daehyun," I said, my voice flat. "I took an oath to do no harm. I think I broke more than just the oath back there." He sat up, ignoring the wince of pain. He took my hands in his. They were steady but icy. "You didn't break anything. You just realized that the world is a surgery, and sometimes you have to cut out the cancer to save the body. That man was the cancer. And what are you?" I asked, looking him in the eye. "The cure? Or just a different kind of disease?" He didn't answer. He just looked out at the falling snow. The silence was broken by a low hum, a drone. It was hovering just outside the window, its red eye blinking. Daehyun didn't reach for his gun this time. He reached for a remote on the table and pressed a button. The drone fell out of the sky, its signal jammed. "They found us faster than I expected," he said, standing up and pulling on his coat. "The ledger. The one you looked at. There was a name you missed. A name encrypted in the metadata." He turned the screen toward me. My heart stopped. "It's my sister," I whispered. "Minna. She's the one providing the data to Kanjin." The betrayal was a jagged blade in my chest. My sister, the only family I had left, was the reason the syndicate was hunting us. She wasn't a victim, she was the architect. "She's at the hospital," Daehyun said, his eyes turning back into the hard, black flint of the dragon. "Kanjin is moving in to extract her. If we want the truth, we have to go back to the one place you never wanted to see again." I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The nurse was gone. The woman standing there had a gold coin in her pocket, a needle in her bag, and a sister to confront. "Let's go," I said. The drive back to Seoul was a descent into a nightmare. The city lights looked like predatory eyes. We pulled up to the back entrance of the hospital, the same bay where the black sedans had first appeared. This time I was the one leading the way. We moved through the darkened halls, the smell of antiseptic now nauseating. We reached the neonatal ward. Through the glass I saw my sister. She was holding a tablet, her face illuminated by the cold blue light. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. "Minna," I whispered as I pushed the door open. She didn't jump. She just turned, her smile widening. I wondered how long it would take for this saint of the ER to figure it out. "You always were slow, Ji-soo. But you were always so useful." Behind her, the shadows of the ward shifted. 3 men stepped out, their guns leveled at Daehyun. But it wasn't the Kanjin syndicate. They were wearing the insignia of the National Intelligence Service. "Daehyun," Minna said, her voice dripping with honey. "Meet my real employers. You thought you were the king of the underworld? You were just a target we used to flush out the entire network. And Ji-soo, she was the perfect bait." Daehyun looked at me, a flash of absolute devastation crossing his face before the mask returned. "You knew." "I didn't," I screamed, turning to Minna. "What have you done?" "I saved us, Ji-soo," she said, stepping forward. "The government wanted the dragon dead. They offered me a way out. All I had to do was make sure you stayed with him long enough for the tracker I put in your medical bag to sync." I looked down at my bag. A small, blue light was blinking inside the lining. The sound of a dozen safeties clicking off echoed through the nursery. We were surrounded by the state, by my family, and by the secrets we had bled to keep. If you want to know if blood is thicker than water, or if the dragon can survive a betrayal from the heart, hit the like button so the next chapter finds its way to you. The silence of the neonatal ward was absolute, save for the rhythmic thrum of infant incubators, a fragile sound of life in a room filled with death. I looked at Minna. My little sister, the girl I had worked double shifts to put through school, was holding a government-issued sidearm with the casual grace of a career killer. "Don't look at me like that, Ji-soo," Minna said, her voice echoing off the sterile tiles. "The world doesn't reward saints. It rewards the people who own the secrets. You chose a dying king. I chose the throne. Daehyun stood perfectly still, his hands raised slightly at his sides. He didn't look at the NIS agents or the guns. He looked only at me. His eyes weren't filled with rage, they were filled with a quiet, devastating apology. He knew he had led me into a trap built by my own blood. The tracker, I whispered, my voice trembling as I looked at my medical bag. Every safe house. Every pier. You led them to everyone, Minna. You didn't just betray me, you murdered dozens of people who were just doing their jobs. Collateral damage, she shrugged. Daehyun dropped the ledger. The digital key for the offshore accounts. Give it to the agents and maybe I'll let my sister live to see the sunrise. Daehyun reached into his inner jacket pocket, his movements agonizingly slow. The NIS lead agent stepped forward, his hand outstretched. But I saw the slight shift in Daehyun's weight, the way his heels dug into the linoleum. He wasn't reaching for a ledger. Ji-soo, Daehyun said, his voice a low vibration. Close your eyes. I didn't close them. I dived. Daehyun pulled a high-intensity magnesium flare from his pocket and slammed it against the floor. The room vanished into a blinding, chemical white light. Screams erupted as the agents, their night vision goggles overloaded by the brilliance, tore the equipment from their faces in agony. I felt a hand grab my arm. Daehyun. He didn't run for the door, he ran for the supply closet. We burst through the doors just as a hail of gunfire shredded the glass partitions of the nursery. In here, he hissed, shoving me toward a laundry chute. I'm not leaving without the files, I said, my adrenaline overriding the fear. If they have the data, they have everything. We have to wipe the server in the basement. Daehyun looked at the blood seeping through his shirt. My stitches had finally failed completely. He was pale, his breathing shallow. I'll hold the hall. You go. You know the layout of this hospital better than anyone. Go to the sub-level. Use the Saints' override. He shoved a pistol into my hand. It felt heavy, cold, and wrong. If you see her, Ji-soo, don't hesitate. She won't. The basement of the hospital smelled of industrial bleach and damp concrete. I moved through the shadows of the boiler room, the pistol held in two shaking hands. My ears were still ringing, but I could hear the distant, heavy thuds of the NIS agents clearing the floors above. I reached the server room, the brain of the hospital's digital network. It was a cage of humming black towers and blinking green lights. I stepped to the main console, my fingers flying across the keys. I wasn't just a nurse. I was the person who had spent years navigating the back end of this system to fix billing errors for patients who couldn't afford to pay. Override code, 10-04 Delta, I whispered. The screen flickered. Access granted. I began the purge. Files began to vanish. The patient blackmail data, the offshore account routes, the names of the doctors Minna had compromised. Stop it, Ji-soo. I froze. Minna stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the red emergency lights of the basement. She was alone. Her face was smudged with soot, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate greed. That data is worth billions, she hissed, stepping into the room. Move away from the console. We can still walk out of here. We can go to Switzerland. Just the two of us. Like we always planned. We never planned this, Minna, I said, my finger hovering over the confirm delete key. You planned a heist. I planned a life. You used my name to ruin these people. I used your name to save us from being nobodies, she screamed, leveling her gun at my heart. Delete that data and I will kill you. I swear it. I looked at my sister, the little girl I used to tuck in, the woman who had just sold her soul for a digital ledger. I realized then that the only way to save her was to take away the thing she loved most. The power. I'm sorry, Minna, I said. I hit the key. The servers let out a high-pitched whine as the drives began to wipe. Minna screamed and pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed my shoulder, spinning me around. I fell against the console, the taste of copper filling my mouth. Minna lunged at the keyboard, her fingers frantically trying to stop the deletion, but it was too late. The screens turned red. Data purged. Zero recovery. She turned on me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She raised the gun again, aiming for the space between my eyes. You ruined everything. A single shot rang out from the shadows of the boiler room. Minna's gun flew from her hand as a bullet caught her in the shoulder. She collapsed, wailing. Daehyun stepped out of the steam, his coat soaked in blood, his face a ghostly mask of exhaustion. He looked at me, then at my sister. The NIS is retreating, he rasped. The data leak you triggered, it's broadcasting to the public. The government can't cover this up anymore. They're burning their own evidence and fleeing. He slumped against the server rack, his strength finally gone. I crawled over to him, my own shoulder burning, and pressed my hand against his wound. We have to go, I whispered. No, he said, taking my hand. The dragon is dead, Ji-soo. The syndicate is gone. Look. He pointed to the screen. The broadcast wasn't just the corruption, it was a video he had recorded in the elevator. A confession. He had taken the blame for everything, shielding me and even shielding Minna's direct involvement in the murders. He was the villain the world needed so the truth could survive. The sunrise over the Han River was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We were sitting on a small wooden pier miles from the city. The matte black SUV was gone, replaced by a rusted fishing boat. Daehyun was pale, his head resting on my shoulder. I had patched him up one last time with the supplies from my bag, but the damage was deep. He was breathing, but every breath was a gift. Why did you take the fall for her? I asked, looking at the city skyline in the distance. Because she's your sister, he said, his voice a faint breeze. And because I wanted you to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and see a nurse, not a criminal. You saved me, Ji-soo. Not just from the bullet. From the dark. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold coin, the one he had given me in the safe house. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. Keep it, he whispered. Not as money. As a reminder. You aren't a victim of the dragon. You are the one who tamed it. His eyes closed. For a terrifying second I thought he was gone. But his pulse was there, slow, steady, and stubborn. If you believe that some wounds are too deep to ever truly heal, but the scars are what make us strong, hit the like button for Ji-soo and Daehyun. 1 year later. The clinic in the hills of Bukshan was quiet. It wasn't a dragon's clinic anymore. It was just a clinic. A place for the forgotten, the homeless, the undocumented, the ones the city had chewed up and spat out. I stood on the balcony, the same one where I had once watched the river with fear. Now I watched it with peace. I wore my white coat, my name embroidered on the pocket, Dr. Han Ji-soo. I felt a presence behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. The scent of cedar and a very specific, expensive tobacco filled the air. The shipment of antibiotics arrived, a familiar, raspy voice said. And the man in room 4 is asking for the saint. I turned and smiled at the man standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple linen shirt, and the dragon tattoo on his arm was partially covered by a medical brace. He looked healthy. He looked free. Tell him the saint is busy, I said, walking toward him. Tell him I'm just a doctor. Daehyun laughed, a warm, genuine sound that I had spent a year learning to love. He reached out and took my hand, his grip no longer a vice but a sanctuary. And what about Minna? He asked. I looked at the small television in the corner. My sister was on the news wearing a prison jumpsuit. She had been sentenced to 20 years but she was smiling. She was teaching law to the other inmates. She had found a different kind of power. She's exactly where she needs to be, I said. We walked into the clinic together, the sunlight streaming through the windows. The world of the Mafia, the NIS, and the secrets of the sublevels felt like a lifetime ago. I looked at the gold coin framed on my desk. It didn't represent wealth anymore. It represented the moment I realized that you don't have to be a monster to survive in a world of monsters. You just have to be the one holding the needle. Ready for the next shift? Daehyun asked. Always, I replied.